June 9, 1973, Belmont Park, Elmont, New York. Jockey Ron Turcotte sat atop Secretariat in the starting gate for the 105th running of the Belmont Stakes, preparing to race 1.5 miles on dirt against 4 competitors who had no chance of beating him. 69,000 fans packed Belmont Park, the largest crowd in the track's history. Millions more watched on CBS television across America. The question wasn't whether Secretariat would win. Everyone knew he would win. The question was whether he'd win the Triple Crown, becoming the first horse in 25 years to sweep the Kentucky Derby, Preakness Stakes, and Belmont Stakes, the 3 races that defined greatness in American thoroughbred racing. As the gates opened at 5:38 p.m. Eastern Time, Secretariat and his main rival Sham burst from their positions, racing side by side through suicidally fast early fractions that would destroy normal horses. They hit the half-mile mark in 46 1/5 seconds, faster than either had run in the Kentucky Derby or Preakness. Track announcer Chic Anderson, calling the race for the television and radio audience, kept waiting for Secretariat to tire, to fade, to prove he was mortal like every other horse. Instead, on the backstretch, Turcotte sitting still as a statue, Secretariat began pulling away. Not gradually, not like a horse winning a close race, like a machine accelerating beyond the capabilities of its competition. "Secretariat is alone," Anderson screamed into his microphone, his voice rising with disbelief. "He is moving like a tremendous machine." By the time Secretariat hit the quarter pole, he was 25 lengths ahead. By the time he crossed the finish line, he was 31 lengths in front of second place Twice a Prince, the largest margin of victory in Belmont Stakes history. His time was 2 minutes and 24 seconds flat, shattering the track record by nearly 3 full seconds, setting a world record for 1.5 miles on dirt that stands unbroken 51 years later. Within seconds, the crowd would erupt in a celebration that transcended horse racing. Turcotte would pump his fist in triumph while Secretariat galloped out, looking like he could run another 1.5 miles without slowing. Owner Penny Chenery would cry tears of joy and vindication, knowing she'd risked everything, her family's farm, her marriage, her reputation, to keep this horse racing despite financial pressures to sell him. And across America, millions of viewers would witness what Sports Illustrated would call the greatest individual athletic performance in history. This is the story of how a chestnut colt born in a modest foaling shed in Virginia became the most dominant thoroughbred in American history, how a Denver housewife with no horse racing experience took over her ailing father's failing farm and turned it into a champion-producing operation, how a 59-year-old French-Canadian trainer came out of retirement to train the greatest horse ever, and why June 9, 1973 remains the most spectacular athletic performance ever witnessed 51 years later. Secretariat was born at 12:10 a.m. on March 30, 1970, in a small whitewashed foaling shed at the Meadow, a thoroughbred breeding farm in Doswell, Virginia, about 20 miles north of Richmond. His birth was attended by farm manager Howard Gentry, assistant manager Raymond Woolfe, and night watchman Bob Southworth. As the newborn colt emerged from his mother, Somethingroyal, Gentry exclaimed, "There's a whopper!" The newborn colt was large, perfectly proportioned, with 3 white stockings on his legs and a coat the color of burnished copper that shone red in the sunlight. When the farm's veterinarian arrived shortly after the birth, he examined the colt and said, years later, "He was beautiful, he was well put together, correct, his legs were perfect, he had a beautiful head and was as red as fire." Elizabeth Ham, secretary to farm owner Christopher Chenery, made the birth record in the farm book. 3 white feet, a lovely colt. She underlined the word lovely twice. The Meadow had been founded by Christopher Chenery, born in 1886 to a poor Virginia family who'd worked his way from poverty to become a millionaire utilities executive in New York. In 1936, after suffering a heart attack at age 50, Chenery returned to Virginia to purchase the Meadow, the farm where he'd visited relatives as a child and learned to ride horses. He'd spent the next 30 years building a first-class thoroughbred breeding and racing operation. By 1970, Christopher Chenery was 84 years old and suffering from dementia. His daughter Helen, Penny Chenery, who'd married Jack Tweedy and settled in Denver to raise 4 children, had returned to Virginia to manage the farm after her mother's death in 1969. The operation was losing money. Facilities were deteriorating. Her siblings wanted to sell the farm to settle estate taxes, but Penny, who'd inherited her father's love of horses and had studied business at Columbia University, decided to try saving the operation. It was an audacious decision for a woman in 1969 when thoroughbred racing was almost exclusively controlled by men. The foal born that March morning had extraordinary bloodlines. His sire was Bold Ruler, who'd won the 1957 Preakness Stakes and had become the dominant stallion in America, leading the North American sire list 8 times. His dam was Somethingroyal, a mare from a line known for stamina and heart. The combination suggested potential for greatness, though Bold Ruler's offspring had a reputation for being fast but lacking the stamina for longer races. The colt's name came from Elizabeth Ham, Christopher Chenery's longtime secretary. She'd previously worked for diplomat Norman Davis when he served at the League of Nations Secretariat in Geneva. She suggested Secretariat as a name, and the Chenery family accepted it. The name would become one of the most famous in sports history. The story of how Penny Chenery ended up with Secretariat involves one of the luckiest losses in horse racing history. In 1965, Christopher Chenery had made an arrangement with Ogden Phipps, owner of Bold Ruler. Each year, 2 meadow mares would be bred to Bold Ruler. Before the foals were born, the owners would flip a coin to determine who got first choice of the 2 foals. In 1968, the mares bred to Bold Ruler were Somethingroyal and Hasty Matelda. In 1969, Penny Chenery, now managing the meadow, met with Phipps to flip the coin. Phipps won the toss. He chose the foal from Hasty Matelda, a filly named the Bride. That filly ran 4 times and never won $1. Chenery had to settle for the foal from Somethingroyal, a colt that would become Secretariat. Years later, Chenery would joke that losing the coin toss was the luckiest thing that ever happened to her.
In early 1970, the Meadows' financial situation was dire. The farm was losing money, estate taxes loomed, and Penny's siblings were pressuring her to sell. Then a colt named Riva Ridge, born at the Meadow in 1969, began winning races in his 2-year-old season. Riva Ridge won 5 stakes races and was named the champion 2-year-old of 1971. The success bought the Meadow time and credibility. Managing the Meadow required Penny to navigate a male-dominated industry that didn't welcome women. When she hired Roger Laurin as trainer in 1969, he helped make the operation profitable. But in May 1971, Laurin left to train for the prestigious Phipps family stables. Penny needed a replacement. She hired Roger's father, Lucien Laurin, a 59-year-old French-Canadian trainer who'd been planning to retire. Lucien Laurin was born in Quebec, Canada, had raced as a jockey on bush tracks, then became a trainer in New York in the 1940s. By 1971, he was a respected veteran who trained good horses, but never a champion. He agreed to take the job temporarily, expecting to retire after 1 season. Then he walked into his barn and saw Riva Ridge, who would win the 1972 Kentucky Derby and Belmont Stakes, fulfilling Christopher Chenery's lifelong dream of producing a Derby winner. And behind Riva Ridge was a big, beautiful red 2-year-old named Secretariat. Jockey Ron Turcotte, who'd ride Riva Ridge to the Derby victory, remembered the first time he saw Secretariat in Laurin's Miami training barn in early 1972. "I was walking down the shed row at Hialeah," Turcotte recalled years later. "I was going to see Riva. I looked to my left and there was this big, beautiful red horse. I said, 'Lucien, who's that red horse?' He says, 'He's too good-looking to be any good. He's royally bred, but I think he's too good-looking to be a runner.'" Laurin's skepticism reflected horsemen's superstition that the prettiest horses often lacked the heart and toughness to win. Secretariat at age 2 stood over 16 hands high, bigger than most 3-year-olds. His coat gleamed copper red in the sunlight. His conformation was almost perfect, Powerful hindquarters, broad chest, perfectly balanced proportions. He looked like an artist's idealized sculpture of a racehorse. Trainers who'd been around the sport for decades said he was the most beautiful horse they'd ever seen. But beautiful horses didn't always run fast. Secretariat's first race was July 4, 1972 at Aqueduct Racetrack in New York, a 5.5-furlong race for 2-year-olds. He broke from the gate poorly, was bumped by other horses, and came in fourth. It was the only time in his entire career that he'd finish a race without placing first, second, or third. But even in that fourth-place finish, he'd made up 7 lengths in the final quarter mile, showing the powerful closing kick that would become his signature. 11 days later, Secretariat won his second race at Saratoga by 6 lengths. He won his third race by 15 lengths. Laurin entered him in the prestigious Sanford Stakes at Saratoga in August, and Secretariat won by 3 lengths. By the end of 1972, Secretariat had won 7 of 9 races, including the Hopeful Stakes, Futurity Stakes, Champagne Stakes, and the Laurel Futurity. He was named Champion 2-year-old and, remarkably, Horse of the Year, only the third 2-year-old ever to receive that honor. The success created a crisis for the Meadow. Christopher Chenery died in January 1973, and his estate owed massive inheritance taxes, over $6 million. The only way to pay the taxes was to syndicate Secretariat, selling breeding rights to a consortium of breeders. The syndication deal, negotiated by Bull Hancock of Claiborne Farm, valued Secretariat at $6.08 million, a record at the time. The deal meant Secretariat would race through his 3-year-old season in 1973, then retire to stud at Claiborne Farm in Kentucky. The 1973 season began with easy victories in Secretariat's first 2 races. Then, 2 weeks before the Kentucky Derby, came disaster. At the Wood Memorial Stakes at Aqueduct, Secretariat finished third behind Anglelight and Sham, a powerful colt trained by Frank Pancho Martin. Secretariat looked lethargic, disinterested, nothing like the champion 2-year-old. After the race, veterinarians discovered an abscess in his mouth that had made it painful for him to accept the bit. The abscess was traded, but doubt had been planted. Was Secretariat as good as everyone thought, or was he a beautiful disappointment? May 5, 1973, Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky, Kentucky Derby. Secretariat entered the Derby as the 3-2 favorite despite the Wood Memorial loss. His main competition was Sham, who'd beaten him at the Wood, and Anglelight, who'd won that race. The Derby is 1.25 miles, the longest race most 3-year-olds have ever run. The field was 13 horses, all of them talented, all of them believing they had a chance. The gates opened and Secretariat broke cleanly, but immediately settled near the back of the pack. Turcotte wasn't concerned. The plan was to let Secretariat settle, then make a move in the final quarter mile. But as the race progressed, Secretariat was farther back than planned, with 10 horses in front of him. Turcotte could feel the power beneath him, the horse waiting, ready to explode. At the far turn, Turcotte let Secretariat loose. The big red horse accelerated through the pack like they were standing still. He passed one horse, then another, then 3 at once. By the time they hit the home stretch, Secretariat had moved from 10th place to 1st, blowing past Sham and opening up a lead. He won by 2.5 lengths in a time of 1 minute, 59 2/5 seconds, becoming the first horse ever to run the Derby in under 2 minutes. The time was so fast that the Longines timer was initially not believed, with officials double-checking before confirming the record. The victory was spectacular, but the performance had a flaw that concerned experts. Secretariat had run his final quarter mile in 23 seconds flat, his fastest quarter of the race. Normal horses slow down in the final quarter after running hard for a mile. Secretariat had accelerated, getting faster as the race went longer. It was unprecedented. It defied conventional understanding of how horses race. Some trainers suggested Turcotte had mismanaged the race, that leaving Secretariat with so much energy for the final quarter meant he'd gone too slow early. The criticism would prove laughable 2 weeks later. May 19, 1973, Pimlico Racetrack, Baltimore, Maryland. Preakness Stakes. The Preakness is 1 3/16 miles, slightly shorter than the Derby, but run on a tighter track with sharper turns. Secretariat again faced Sham along with 4 other horses. As the gates opened, Secretariat broke last, dead last in a 6-horse field. Turcotte wasn't concerned.
Panicking, he knew what the horse could do, but racing fans watching were stunned. How could the Derby winner break so poorly? Then, on the first turn, Secretariat made a move that photographer Raymond Woolfe captured in a photograph that would become iconic. Secretariat launched himself forward in a leaping stride, all 4 feet off the ground simultaneously, closing ground on the leaders with breathtaking acceleration. By the time they hit the backstretch, Secretariat had gone from last to first in a matter of seconds. He opened up a lead and never looked back, winning by 2.5 lengths over Sham in a time of 1 minute 53 seconds flat. The time appeared on the tote board, and track officials initially thought it was wrong. It was 2/5 of a second faster than the track record set by Canonero II in 1971. Officials checked the times, concluded there had been an error, and posted a time of 1 minute 54 2/5. The slower time stood as the official result for 39 years. In 2012, after reviewing the race footage and timing technology, Pimlico officials corrected the record. Secretariat had indeed run 1 minute 53 flat, a track record that still stands. 2 wins, 2 track records. The Triple Crown, which hadn't been won since Citation in 1948, was within reach. All Secretariat had to do was win the Belmont Stakes, the longest and most grueling of the 3 races. The Belmont Stakes is 1.5 miles, a quarter mile longer than the Derby and 5/16 of a mile longer than the Preakness. It's called the Test of the Champion because the distance exposes any weakness in a horse's stamina. Since 1948, 6 horses had won the Derby and Preakness but failed at the Belmont: Tim Tam, Carryback, Northern Dancer, Kauai King, Forward Pass, and Canonero II. Each had been unable to handle the 1.5-mile distance after 2 grueling races in 5 weeks. Secretariat's breeding added to the doubt. Bold Ruler, his sire, had a reputation for producing fast horses but that lacked stamina. Bold Ruler's offspring were brilliant at sprints and middle distances but often struggled at 1.5 miles. Critics wondered if Secretariat, despite his Derby and Preakness records, would hit the proverbial wall at Belmont. Even Lucien Laurin, normally confident, was nervous. "The distance concerns me," he told reporters. "We've never tried him at 1.5 miles." The only horse who seemed completely unconcerned was Secretariat himself. In the weeks leading up to the Belmont, he trained brilliantly. Just days before the race, he ran 5 furlongs in under a minute in a morning workout, a blistering pace that left clockers shaking their heads. Turcotte told reporters he's ready for a top charge on Saturday. June 9, 1973, dawned clear and warm. By early afternoon, fans were streaming into Belmont Park. The anticipation was suffocating. CBS planned comprehensive coverage unusual for a horse race. The New York Times ran front-page stories about the race for days leading up to it. Virginia's governor, Linwood Holton, flew to New York to watch Virginia's superhorse attempt history. Secretariat faced just 4 opponents in the Belmont: Sham, who'd been second in both the Derby and Preakness; Twice a Prince, My Gallant, and PVT Smiles. But the real opponent was the distance itself. Could Secretariat maintain his speed for 1.5 miles, or would the Bold Ruler bloodline betray him in the final quarter mile? At 5:38 p.m. Eastern Time, the gates opened. Secretariat broke sharply from his rail post. Sham, desperately trying to make Secretariat run fast early and tire him out, matched strides with the champion. Together, they rocketed through the first quarter mile in 23 3/5 seconds, absurdly fast for horses intending to run 1.5 miles. They hit the half-mile mark in 46 1/5 seconds. Track announcers were waiting for Secretariat to slow down, to show signs of fatigue. He didn't. On the backstretch, with the horses straightening out for the run down the far side of the track, Turcotte glanced at the timer on the tote board. They were running impossibly fast. Turcotte made a decision. He stopped restraining Secretariat. He let the horse run as fast as he wanted.
If Secretariat wanted to burn himself out trying to break records, Turcotte wouldn't stop him. It was either going to be the greatest performance in racing history or a catastrophic collapse. There was no middle ground. Secretariat began pulling away from Sham. Not gradually, not like a horse winning by a length or two. He opened up 3 lengths, then 5, then 7. By the time they hit the 1-mile mark, Secretariat was 7 lengths ahead of Sham, and Sham was starting to fade backwards through the field. Secretariat ran the first mile in 1 minute 34 1/5 seconds, faster than he'd run the first mile in the Kentucky Derby. Chic Anderson, calling the race from the press box, was trying to find words for what he was witnessing. Secretariat is widening now. He is moving like a tremendous machine. Anderson's voice was rising with excitement, professionalism breaking down in the face of something unprecedented. The crowd of 69,138 was on its feet, screaming, many crying, hugging strangers. This wasn't just a horse race. It was witnessing athletic perfection, seeing something that transcended sport and became art.
Turcotte pumped his fist as they galloped out, Secretariat barely winded, looking like he could run another 1.5 miles. When they returned to the winner's circle, Penny Chenery was crying, overwhelmed by emotion. She had saved her father's farm, defied her siblings, navigated a male-dominated industry, and produced the greatest racehorse in history. Lucien Laurin, the 61-year-old trainer who'd come out of retirement for 1 season, stood in disbelief at what he'd accomplished. And Secretariat, the horse they'd said was too beautiful to run, had just delivered the most dominant performance in sporting history. The immediate aftermath was chaotic celebration. Virginia's governor presented Chenery with a proclamation. New York officials praised the performance. CBS replayed the race constantly. The photo of Secretariat in full stride, all 4 feet off the ground, Turcotte looking back at the field 25 lengths behind, became one of sport's most iconic images. The performance's statistical improbability became clearer in the following days. Secretariat had run each furlong faster than Sham, who'd finished last, beaten by almost 50 lengths. The time of 2:24 wasn't just a record, it was unbreakable. In the 51 years since, no horse has come within 2 seconds of Secretariat's time. The closest was Monarchos in 2001, at 2:24 3/5, still slower. Easygoer, Sunday Silence, AP Indy, Point Given, Smarty Jones, every great horse since has tried and failed to match what Secretariat did. Sports Illustrated put Secretariat on the cover with the headline, AP Indy. Time magazine ran a cover story. Secretariat became the first non-human athlete to appear on the covers of Time, Newsweek, and Sports Illustrated in the same week. He was more famous than most human athletes, a genuine cultural phenomenon. The question of how Secretariat ran so fast has been debated for 5 decades. After his death in 1989, a necropsy revealed his heart weighed 22 pounds, more than twice the normal weight of a thoroughbred's heart. Normal thoroughbred hearts weigh 8 to 9 pounds. Secretariat's massive heart, which is damn Somethingroyal, had passed to several of her offspring, allowed him to pump more blood and oxygen to his muscles, giving him stamina that other horses couldn't match. It was a genetic gift, a physical advantage that made him capable of performances other horses couldn't achieve. Secretariat raced 6 more times after the Belmont, winning 4 races and finishing second twice. He was retired in November 1973 after winning the Canadian International Stakes, his 16th win in 21 career starts. His lifetime earnings were $1,316,808, a record at the time. He retired to Claiborne Farm in Kentucky to begin his stud career. As a stallion, Secretariat sired over 660 foals, including Lady Secret, who was named Horse of the Year in 1986, and Risen Star, who won the Preakness and Belmont in 1988. His bloodline continues today. Every horse in the 2025 Kentucky Derby was a descendant of Secretariat. His genetic influence on thoroughbred racing has been immeasurable, his offspring and descendants carrying forward his speed, stamina, and heart.
On October 4, 1989, Secretariat contracted laminitis,
a painful degenerative hoof disease with no cure. After treatments failed, the 19-year-old stallion was euthanized. A necropsy revealed the oversized heart that had allowed his unprecedented performances. He was buried at Claiborne Farm in a ceremony attended by hundreds. His grave marker simply says, Secretariat, March 30th, 1970, October 4th, 1989. Penny Chenery lived until 2017, passing away at age 95. She never stopped talking about Secretariat, never tired of recounting the 1973 season, never lost her pride in what they'd accomplished together. In 2010, Disney released Secretariat, a film about the horse and Chenery's role in his career, with Diane Lane portraying Chenery and John Malkovich as Lucien Laurin. Chenery consulted on the film and made a cameo appearance. Lucien Laurin trained horses until 1977, retiring at age 65. He died in 2000 at age 88, having trained 2 Triple Crown winners, Secretariat and indirectly Seattle Slew, since he'd trained Seattle Slew's dam. He never sought publicity, never wrote a book, remained a humble horseman who'd been blessed with the greatest horse ever. Ron Turcotte continued riding until 1978, when a spill at Belmont Park left him paralyzed from the waist down. He spent the last 46 years in a wheelchair, making regular appearances at horse racing events, always gracious in discussing Secretariat. He was inducted into the National Museum of Racing and Hall of Fame in 1979. In 1999, Sports Illustrated ranked Secretariat as the 35th greatest athlete of the 20th century across all sports, the only non-human on the list. In 2013, on the 40th anniversary of the Belmont victory, the New York Racing Association placed a blue and white checkered pole at Belmont Park, located 253 feet 2 inches from the finish line, marking the spot where second place, Twice a Prince, crossed when Secretariat finished. The pole remains there today, a permanent reminder of the most dominant performance in sports history. The Blood Horse magazine's top 100 racehorses of the 20th century ranked Secretariat second, behind only Man o' War, who raced in 1919-1920. Many modern experts argue Secretariat should be first, that his documented times and performances exceed anything Man o' War achieved. The debate is unresolvable. Man o' War raced in an era before electronic timing, but it's telling that Secretariat is in the conversation at all, competing with a horse from an era when racing was America's most popular sport. The cultural impact of Secretariat's 1973 season extended beyond racing. In June 1973, America was consumed by Watergate hearings, with President Nixon's administration collapsing in scandal. The Vietnam War was ending in humiliating defeat. Gas shortages and inflation were devastating the economy. National morale was low. Secretariat's Triple Crown provided a moment of pure joy, uncomplicated excellence, a reminder that greatness was still achievable. The response was emotional, almost desperate. People needed something to celebrate, and Secretariat gave them that. The 1973 Belmont Stakes remains the standard against which all sporting performances are judged. When an athlete or team dominates their competition, the comparison is always to Secretariat at Belmont. Michael Jordan's 1991 NBA Finals, Tiger Woods' 1997 Masters, Usain Bolt's 2009 world record 100-meter dash. Every dominant performance invites the question, was that as dominant as Secretariat at Belmont? The answer is almost always no. Secretariat didn't just win. He won by a margin that would be equivalent to a marathon runner finishing 31 minutes ahead of second place, or an NBA team winning a championship game by 90 points, or a golfer winning a major by 31 strokes. The margin was absurd, incomprehensible, a statistical anomaly that shouldn't exist.
Competitive sports. Except it did exist. Captured on film, witnessed by 69,138 people and millions on television, undeniable and permanent. When Lucien Laurin first saw Secretariat in his barn in early 1972, he'd said the horse was too beautiful to be any good. The comment reflected horseman's wisdom that pretty horses often lack the toughness to win. Secretariat proved that wisdom wrong. He was the most beautiful horse anyone had ever seen, and he was also the fastest, the strongest, the most dominant. Beauty and greatness weren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes they came together in a package so perfect that it seemed almost unreal. On June 9, 1973, that perfect package ran 1.5 miles in 2 minutes and 24 seconds, winning by 31 lengths, setting a world record that has stood for 51 years and will likely stand forever. Because Secretariat wasn't just a great racehorse, he was the greatest racehorse. And on that June afternoon at Belmont Park, he proved it in a way that left no doubt, no debate, no question. He was simply perfect.